Good evening, everyone. I'm Annette Insdorf. I am very lucky to be the moderator of the 92Y Real Pieces series and a professor of film history at Columbia University. It is such a pleasure to welcome Sofia Coppola, the writer and director of acclaimed films, including The Virgin Suicides from 1999, Lost in Translation, Academy Award winner for Best Original Screenplay of 2003, Marie Antoinette from 2006, and The Beguiled, which earned her the Cannes Film Festival Award for Best Director in 2017. I'm going to start with a few questions before we take them from you. And since you are a very numerous group tonight, I gather we've got 1,000 participants.
Wow.
That means, yeah, that means we'll have to use chat as the primary way for you to raise questions. And I, together with some of the 92Y folks, we're going to try very hard to read through them as fast as we can. We hope to cover aspects like Sofia's conception for how a movie looks, including her inspirations, how she translates her ideas from script to screen, and how she works with collaborators like the cinematographer and the editor. We suggest that you use the speaker view. In other words, on your screen, it's going to say gallery view, but that means it's on speaker view. That way, I believe you'll get the best of Sofia Coppola's remarks. And before we start, I just want to say a hearty thank you to A24. Their sponsorship has enabled this event to be free. And I hope you all know that A24 is that superb production and distribution company. So I will begin with a question for Sofia. You studied photography at Mills College in Oakland, you studied painting at Cal Arts, and I read that for Lost in Translation, you created 40 pages of photographs for the crew so that they could understand your visual intentions. So do your films tend to originate more in images than in characters or stories?
Yeah, I just want to say hi and thanks to everyone for joining us, and thank you, Annette. I do think whenever I start a project, it starts with the images. A few images come to mind, and that becomes the mood of it. Or with Lost in Translation, it was the place, and then I started putting images together of how I saw the feeling of the story come together in my head. But I started by studying art, and I wanted to be a painter, and I knew I wanted to be a visual artist. And then I got interested in photography, and I had a great teacher at Art Center. I kind of hopped around. I went to Cal Arts, I went to Art Center, and Paul Jasmine was my photo teacher who really encouraged me and told me that I had a point of view that was unique. And just learning and exposing me to photography. And so my interest in photography definitely, I learned a lot that I took into when I started doing filmmaking. And really the beginning part for me is putting reference images together whenever I start a project. It's a way to articulate what I see in my head and to show my team what I have in mind, and just for me to start to figure it out.
And in fact, you shared with us some of the images that have in fact been influential in your visual conception. And if you don't mind, I think we should share that with all of these wonderful people, because it's so rare that we get to have a kind of shared text of where your visual origins might be. As we're showing these images, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what they are.
Yeah, I mean, for each film, I usually put together a book of images, and they're probably about 20 or pages or more, even. And so these ones I just put together a page per film, images in my head that kind of start the look. So this is Virgin Suicides. On the right is an Eggleston photo whose work I love, especially for his color and the mood. And then the other image is by Bill Owens, who did a book on suburbia, which I looked a lot at those photos when I was doing Virgin Suicides. For that, there's little stars hanging in the dance scene was kind of reference from this. But just as a starting point of kind of the mood and the feeling, I always like to start with these kind of images. So that was the starting kind of feeling of Virgin Suicides. And then each page is just one page per, oh, this is lost in translation. They're in order of my work. John Caceres is the artist that did the underwear shot, which is some with the reference for the opening shot, and then just kind of this blurry Tokyo city. And just kind of, it started as just these abstract images of the city and kind of a girl lying around a room. And so these are all just to show you starting point of just kind of the mood of each one. This is Marie Antoinette. Can you see the image on the right, or are we cutting it off with the speakers? But I'm not sure. But yeah, so
full image.
Oh, okay. So the image on the right is from Odile Gilbert, is a French hair designer, hair person who comes from fashion, who worked a lot with John Galliano, and that's an image from her book. And she ended up, I asked her to work on the film, and she came up with those great, the great hair for Marie Antoinette, which was really fun to work with her. But looking at the work of John Galliano was a big influence in kind of the look of Marie Antoinette and how to treat the colors and the kind of fashion aspect of it. And then it's a Bow Wow Wow album cover. And there was, the whole approach was to do 18th century, but through kind of a new romantic look. And that was kind of what I thought of from when I was a teenager. And then lingerie macaroons and this kind of color palette. And so these are kind of the starting images, feeling of Marie Antoinette.
And then I think we have at least one more. Yep.
That's somewhere. I always love this image that Bruce Weber took of Matt Dillon. And so that was the first image that came to my mind. I think I put it at the front of the script at one point. I just always like to have a starting point image for the mood of the movie. So is that combined with tabloid tragedy, bad boy feeling.
And I think there's at least one more.
I think there's two more. This is Bling Ring, which came from an article in Vanity Fair that's what that image on the left is, one of the real girls. And then of course Paris Hilton in her closet. So
I find that really fascinating, the way that the visual image is indeed the point of departure. It leads me to ask, do you actually storyboard? Because you obviously have such a strong visual frame of reference.
Yeah, I don't. I never have. I think when I started my first film, I always make little kind of rough stick figure sketch, very rough, crude sketches in my script. Sometimes if I have an idea of a shot that I want to talk to the DP about, but I don't storyboard because I feel like I never plan it out before. I know some people really plan every shot before they film, but I like to kind of just set it all up and then get to the set and figure it out. And I think the hardest thing for me making films are figuring out the coverage and the shots. And I remember my first film, the producer's like, you have to have your shot list before you get on set, and you have to show up with the shot list. And so, well, how do you know until you get there and you see where the actors go and what they feel like doing? And they always do things the way they want to do it. So now I always go to the set and rehearse with just the actors and the cinematographer, and we rehearse the scene and then see where the actors feel comfortable being in. You never know until the actors are there. So we watch the scene, and then they go into hair and makeup, and then how we want to cover the scene and how simply we can cover it, because you can get yourself into a corner of a million different shots. So there's really that moment where you just kind of explore it, and then they go get ready, and then we make a plan. And I found it really helpful. Philippe Lassorde, who I've worked with on the last few films, who I love working with, and is helpful to me throughout every step. But we found a way, because everything has to be visual for me to absorb it. He takes stills of all the shots that we've talked about and prints them out, and then we look at them and kind of storyboard it that way. And then we realize, we don't need this 2-shot because that's similar to the master. So we kind of do the storyboard the morning of the shoot, and I find it really helpful to make a plan. But I feel like you have to do it in the moment, because you just don't know. And also things change, because I'm not shooting in a controlled environment, building sets. I like to shoot on location, and things change. You might want to do it outside. So I try to be as prepared but as flexible as possible.
You were, I think, very wise to choose for your first feature as the cinematographer Ed Lachman. I think he's one of the greatest working today. This was for the Virgin Suicides. And I remember how A.O. Scott, in his very laudatory New York Times review, he said that Lachman shoots the bright colors of the 1970s as if through a layer of gauze. His
Wow.
dim, fuzzy tones suggest the darkening shades of memory. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit also about how you worked with him, because he is such a poet of light.
Yes, I love working with Ed Lachman, and he's such a great person. It was so helpful to me on my first film because, of course, I was just learning, and there can be this kind of DPs that can be bossy, and he was really helping me make the look that I wanted and really supporting me, and he's such a lovely person. So yeah, I'm so grateful I got to work with him on my first film, especially, and I loved his work his work with Todd Haynes, who I'm such a fan of, and so yeah, and I showed him photo references, and then he helped me. They really help you interpret um, what you see in your head and how to do it. And it was very important to me that that movie did not take place in the 70s, but it was a memory looking back at the 70s, and so it always had to have a feeling of memory, and even with the music, having Air do the score gave it to me some kind of dreamy filter through it being a memory, and that music wasn't of the 70s, it was more contemporary, but kind of looking back at that. So I think once you think of kind of the themes and the setting, then all the little elements, all these elements, feed that.
Yeah. And as long as some of the chat questions have been a bit about your inspirations, influences, and I was just wondering about something in the male voiceover narration of the Virgin Suicides spoken by Giovanni Ribisi. I sensed an echo of Francois Truffaut's very first film, Les Mistons. It was a short that he made before the 400 Blows. I have no idea if you have seen it, but also the male voice recalls how boys worshipped a beautiful female. Is that,
No, I never saw that.
oh, you have to.
I love 400 Blows and I love Truffaut, so I have to see that. No.
Oh, okay. I'm
But
gonna.
I
I
feel
will.
like the French are always good at recalling memories and women that they loved. But no, I have to see that.
Yes, and the French New Wave directors like Truffaut and Godard. Um, there was very much an acknowledgement of this male gaze that was actually more adolescent for the grown men than not. So there's that sense of
Yeah, I
yeah.
always loved those movies. And I remember seeing Breathless as a teenager, and that made such a big impact on me. And I still always talk about that film and just the French New Wave feeling of intimacy. I think the way they held the cameras close and you feel like you're with the characters.
By the way, there are so many. I'm trying to keep one eye on chat and one eye on you. There are so many great ones coming in that I'm just going to go for a second to one or two of them. I'm going to, for the moment, repeat them, but maybe towards the end of our hour, we'll be able to unmute an individual or two who has a question. Laurie Hamilton wrote, "You have a very sparse, elegant, and symbolic language. It treats the audience as intelligent, able to draw conclusions without being spoon-fed. What is your process for editing dialogue and action, both before you start shooting and after?"
Oh, thank you. Oh, I want to say, because Annette, you told me that Sarah Flack is here on our Zoom.
Yes, I believe Sarah Flack is with us. There she is. I see her waving. May I
Okay.
simply mention that Sarah Flack is not only a fantastic human being who comes to the Y a lot, but she has been editing Sofia Coppola's films ever since Lost in Translation, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. Yeah. And hi, Sarah. Yeah. No, I love working with Sarah, and she's an important collaborator and has edited all these films. So the question was um, about
Um,
or
what is
about
your process for editing dialogue and action, both before you start shooting and after?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think it starts when you're writing the script, how you imagine the scene, and I'm always interested in less is more. And I feel that a lot of times in real life, people can't articulate their feelings, but there's a little mannerism they do or some visual way of explaining how they're feeling with, nobody says, I'm feeling this way, or very rarely the people really say what they're feeling, and more, it's more interesting how they express it, maybe non-verbally or saying something else than what is really what they're expressing. But so I guess I'm interested in showing things through visual storytelling and how you can convey a feeling or a sense of the story through the visual aspects of it. But so it starts in the script about what they're talking about, and then I guess when we're editing, we're finding its shape and finding the the pauses and the rhythm in the editing. But first you see what the actors decide to do, and then in the edit you can enhance that or change it.
Sarah, do you usually edit while the film is being shot, or do you tend to do most of the work afterwards?
You want me to answer, or?
Oh, I want to get
Sofia. I'll let Sofia.
I'm sure Sofia is going to be happy to share the screen for a moment.
Well, like most films, I get the dailies as they're shooting, and then I put together a rough cut during the editing. I mean, excuse me, during the shooting, and then Sofia and I work together from that.
And do you usually work together in the same space, or do you necessarily send each other material?
Well, when I'm filming, I'm just really focused on filming, and Sarah's getting the footage as we go. And so I'm not seeing her during that, but she'll send messages to the set if she sees something that could be helpful to us, like, oh, I wish I had another cutaway in that scene, or the close-ups are really working. Or so she'll give us feedback, but then we're not together until after I wrap. Then I come to the edit, and the first step is watching the rough cut, which is everybody knows is probably the hardest thing in making a film, is seeing the rough cut. It's always traumatic, except for when I started working with Sarah, it was not traumatic because she does such a great first cut, and she knows me so well that it's actually it actually has shape and something I can relate to. So that's been something I really appreciate. There's a saying, I think my dad told me, that you're never as great as your dailies, and it's never as awful as your first cut. So I remember.
I see a lot of my Columbia University students on this. I'm sure that is a very important thing for them to hear. I just saw a really fine question from Timothy McDermott. He writes, your movies each have a very specific tone and atmosphere. And for me, a large part of the atmosphere is the music. Whenever I listen to a soundtrack of yours, I'm instantly in the world of the movie, and it feels unique. How do you go about selecting the music for your movies? And by the way, I'm asking this question now because it seems integral to the whole question of editing.
Oh yeah, and Sarah is so great at working with music and editing to music, so that's a part that we really enjoy. But when I'm writing the script, I listen to music, and that's usually when I find the sort of the tone or the atmosphere between the visuals, kind of the colors and the look of it, and then the music. So it usually starts in the writing process, where I think of it early on, because like you said, it really does set a tone or an atmosphere and helps shape that. And then I'll have some songs in my mind for a certain scene, or we'll just get a bunch of songs that relate to the mood and whoever's helping with the music, and then Sarah and I will play around, or she'll throw things in on the rough cut, and it'll take shape from there.
Right.
Just for the film, so I'll say also, we always try to cut scenes get them to work without music, because they're always better when you put music on them, and you don't want to use that as a crutch. So it's important to try to get the scenes to work as well as they can without music, and then it just adds to it to have music. But I think it's good not to rely on that, because you want to get them as strong and standing on their own as much as you can.
Right. Matthew Ryan is asking about the balance between actors, oops, and I just lost it because so many more came in at the same time, between actors following the script versus improvisation on the set. And I was actually going to ask you about this myself, because you are both the writer and the director of your films. So I'm wondering, do you tend to stay very close to the script, or do you allow for a certain degree of improvisation?
Yeah, I love improvisation, so I'm very open to the actors adding as much as they want. And if it doesn't feel right, I can always tell them, oh no, that doesn't feel right, or that's too much. But I always love when things when there's an improvement that they come to, or we find something new. And one of my favorite things of working with Bill Murray is he always comes up with something that I would have not thought of. It's a fun surprise, and it brings energy, and the other actor reacts in a way that, you know, feels more like life, where you don't know exactly what they're going to say. So I always love when there's I always love what's added to it. And I felt that about everything. I try not to plan it all out, because there was that kind of energy on set of discovering things and getting ideas together.
I'm actually going to ask you a question that was about 5 minutes ago on chat vis-a-vis Bill Murray as muse, but I just saw one that's related to this, which is from Brian. Typically, how much time do you give for rehearsals? I just finished Lumet's Making Movies, and he was very religious for 2 weeks of rehearsals in advance of filming. I was curious of your approach.
Yeah, I always try to have a rehearsal period of a week or 2 weeks before each film. And usually, I was talking to Kirsten Dunst the other day, because we were talking about Virgin Suicides, because it's the 20th anniversary, which is hard to believe. And I forgot that we spent time in the house where we shot in, and they spent time together as a family and made lunch together and did things. So we have rehearsal, but we don't really rehearse the dialogue. We just usually start with the table reading, and then we just do improvisations to kind of get all the actors as the characters, to kind of know their hierarchy and their place in the group. And during Beguiled, we had all these lessons for the girls, where Nicole Kidman would, you know, be in charge of the lessons, and Kirsten would assist, and their dynamics started to be established, and the girls made friendships, and they would do sewing and etiquette and dancing, all the things of that period that girls would know. But while they were doing that, they were kind of forming, you know, different relationships. And so I always find, that period really helpful before.
Good. So yes, of course, people have been asking about Bill Murray. You have worked with him twice, and I'm going to ask you later about On the Rocks. Your latest film is, in fact, your third collaboration with him. Because you, I believe, at one point even said the word muse, people are asking, did you write Lost in Translation directly for him? And how much improvisatory work did he do with you for Lost in Translation?
Yes, I wrote it with him in mind. I mean, it started sort of like a fantasy of, what if Bill Murray was my friend that I ran into? Or, you know, like I'm always such a fan of his. And so he really inspired that. And I wasn't going to make the movie without him. So I was like, I have to talk Bill Murray into this, because I don't have a plan B, and I can't make it with anyone else. And so I was really, really relieved when he came on board. And I just knew that he would bring his unique, there's no one like him. I knew he would bring all of that. And I also knew that I imagined he would probably be a great improviser from SNL and all his work. So it was really so much fun to work with him. And sometimes we would have two cameras, because just he would come up with things, and then to get the reaction of the other person was, you know, if it was Scarlett or whoever's in the scene with him, it's always fun when he has, you know, throws surprises. And so I was always very welcoming of his ideas, and that's why I love to work with him, is he just brings has so many great ideas.
And in case people don't remember, in between there was A Very Murray Christmas. Is that the television film that you did before On the Rocks, right?
Yeah, we did it. I think it was like an hour long. We did a Christmas special for Netflix with him, and that was fun. I was just like, it started out as I always loved to see Bill singing, and I said, oh, can you do a residency at the Carlisle singing? And anyway, it turned into this Christmas special that was just fun to do, and we shot it in a few days, and it was just a fun side project.
Iris is asking about Lost in Translation. She says she thinks about it on a weekly basis. Even after all these years, it sticks with me. Can you speak a bit about creating the dreaminess and feeling lost in the landscape of the movie?
Oh, thank you. I'm happy if it stays with you. I mean, that was really from a period of my life, because I was in my 20s. I wrote it in my late 20s, but it was about being that moment in your mid 20s after college. You're supposed to know what you're doing, and you're kind of lost and trying to find your way, or at least that's how I was feeling. So I was trying to express, you know, what I was going through. And then I had spent a lot of time in Tokyo, and it's always like this jet lag, blurry, you know, neon at night feeling. So I was just really trying to capture the feeling of what it was like then. And I think definitely the music, having My Bloody Valentine and all this kind of Tokyo dream pop, we called it, it kind of added to that feeling. And we were all jet lagged when we were making it. And so it was all kind of in that mood and blur. And um, and yeah, so that was the mood we were in and trying to capture.
Um, there are so many good questions, but everyone seems to be asking about On the Rocks, because that is your next film, and we're all so curious if you can give us, at least verbally, a bit of a preview. This is Bill Murray and Rashida Jones?
Yes, they play father and daughter, and she's married to Marlon Wayans, who's a successful businessman who's traveling a lot and has a beautiful assistant, and she has suspicions, and the dad, who's kind of a sophisticated playboy, kind of gets her paranoid because he's seeing men through his point of view, and it's sort of the between the two generations, the clash of her being young woman, he's a gentleman of another generation, and the kind of the clash of how they look at relationships, and also how your relationships with your parent affects your relationships in your life. And I feel like I'm not articulating it well because we finished a little while ago, but it's yeah, so it's the two of them as a father-daughter sort of on a little adventure to spy on her husband. If that, Sarah, am I describing it right? And I wanted it to it's a lot of them talking about life and men and women and over martinis and in New York, kind of the past, and I wanted, for me personally, an exercise was I was talking to Buck Henry, who of course is a writing hero of mine who we all loved, and I was talking to him in the early stages, and he said, write some dialogue for once, write some dialogue. And he pushed me. So I said, oh, I'm going to write some dialogue. So I wrote pages and pages of dialogue. And that was a whole new challenge, but something I've never done before. So that was interesting. And definitely in the editing room, it was a whole different way to take shape. But a lot of it's, Rashida and Bill talking about relationships and men and women.
Okay. A few of people have asked about shooting on film versus digital. Could you say a few words about that?
Yeah, I love film. I'm sentimental about film, and I feel like whenever if you have the choice to shoot on film when you can, it just has a different feeling to me, and the skin and the texture, and especially with a period film, I feel. But I know you can do anything with digital and make it look like anything. But I love the feeling of film. And Bling Ring was the only film I shot digitally because it suited the subject matter, because it's very in your face and immediate, and it just has a different feeling. So to me, they're really like two different mediums, and I think you have to choose what's right for your story.
Okay. I, of course, appreciate a question that just came in. Raquel writes, with Annette moderating, I can't help but think about the opening images of your films. Yeah, I wrote a book recently, Cinematic Overtures, How to Read Opening Scenes. Can you speak to how you construct your opening scenes as a visual first impression of your stories?
Yeah, I think when I'm writing, when I'm starting a story, I think about how I want to start it off, and I like to jump right in there and not kind of get the audience into the story and then explain it as you go, I think. But I don't know, when I'm starting to write it, I think about the first images and how to convey the visual story. And with our new film, we have to kind of show them jump in time and set up the story. So how you do that visually, well, I won't explain that, but yeah, am I answering the question? Yeah, I definitely think about kind of visually how you can get the character into the story as quickly as possible and into the place, and also in the point of view of the character. I'm always thinking about whose point of view the camera is.
Well, I'm actually remembering the opening scene, for example, of The Beguiled. I really appreciated the sound design and the spare use of music, because often if a film begins with too much music or too much voiceover narration, I go, crutches. But you begin and end with a girl's voiceover humming a song, and those sustained synth chords. It's Phoenix. Some of you know that Phoenix is the band of your husband, Tavis Morris. And it began in a way, The Beguiled, that made me realize how cinematic this world is, as opposed to adapted from a book, which originally it was. And I get the feeling that sometimes you're very careful about not doing too much exposition at the beginning, but creating the mood. Would that be right?
Yeah, definitely. I agree. I think my first impression, I want people to get into the mood, and with that, we were in the South, and to hear the insects and the fact that they were so isolated, I didn't want to fill it with music. I wanted you to, feel like you're with her, going into the forest, and so as much as you can feel like you're with the character, not distancing from them, and to set the mood first, and then you find out pieces of the story as you go along.
Right. A few people have been asking about your process in terms of writing. For example, can you provide some tips like what time of the day? Is there a particular ritual that you stick to in your screenwriting?
Oh, that's funny. I love and hate writing, probably like all writers. I find that to be the most difficult part, and also you're doing it alone, and so I just look forward to like being on set with my whole team and getting to be all together and make something together. So the writing process, before having kids, I would stay up all night. I love to write at night because I feel like it sort of doesn't count as work, and your mind is in a different mode, and you're not going to get a call or someone interrupting you. So I love working at night. But then I have two daughters, and having to get up from school, I couldn't write at night anymore. So trying to figure it out during the day. But I'm not a morning person. But I think you have to build procrastination into your writing schedule. I feel like that's really important. It can take a few hours just to procrastinate before you get started. So I think you definitely need, as much as you can, bigger spans of time to daydream and look through books and do other things and not feel uptight about that, because that's all part of, for me at least, part of the process of that. And and listening to music so my routine is kind of all over the place, but I do like to write at night. But I think everyone has to find their own rhythm. And then my friend who's a writer who doesn't have kids says that he's a night writer too, and he said maybe you're just a night writer and you have to embrace that. So I guess you'd have to find what works for you, but I always find it really hard. And then there's moments that it's exciting when things start to take shape. But I think it's important not to look at it too much, and not be, as much as you can be, not be critical, and just kind of keep going and then look at it later.
Actually, about 40 or 50 chat questions ago, I remember Michael raised a question about the wonderful library visible behind you that led him to ask, are there particular literary sources that you go back to or that inspire you when you're, I think he may have specified when you're, but in general.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually at the research library of Zoetrope, my family's company, which was great to grow up around. And so yeah, research is a big part of it. I think anytime you're interested in a certain period or time, learning more about it. And what the question is about literary sources that I go back to?
Do you go back to certain literary, not just visual sources?
That's a good question. No, I mean, I have books that I love, but I think the things that I go back to are more visual, other films or photographs. I'm trying to think of, characters from books. But no, they're more from movies and photos, although I do have favorite characters from books that I love.
Okay. A question just came in that touches me from Chela Criterion. It's fascinating to learn about your process. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on navigating the stillness and isolation of this time as an artist, particularly for those of us who are so used to finding visual inspiration on the go in this city that never sleeps.
Oh, about all being home right now? Yeah, I think to me, it's just been amazing how the day just goes by and you've done like one thing, because there's so much that I never realized in just taking care of your home and just basics when you're really paused like this. But I feel like, with movies, we're able to travel places and be inspired. So I feel like movies are, they're always important to me, but especially now it's our way to kind of leave our apartments or, reality. So I feel like that they mean so much more to me right now, I think.
And somebody asked about 20 questions ago, are there particular films that you've been watching now with your children since you're enforced at home?
Yeah, at first our internet was out, and so we were just with like what DVDs we had, and it was really fun because they kind of just had to watch whatever we had, and we couldn't argue over watching High School Musical 3 or something. So we watched Preston Sturges, we watched The Lady Eve, and Miracle at Morgan's Creek, which I'm surprised they liked so much. I remember loving it as a kid. And then, but really random, we watched Working Girl, which I love, and then I thought, okay, we're going to use this time, to have some film, history, and we watched the first of the Apu trilogy, which was challenging for them and really slow, but then it was so satisfying. So that one I felt like was a lot of work, but it was really so touching at the end. And then they complained about, no, we don't have to watch the second one, so we put it off. But it was really beautiful and so touching and emotional, and how little that they had, and we're all, at the beginning of lockdown, being kind of freaked out about, having enough, and it's just so beautiful, that story about that family. So that was touching. I'm trying to think what else we were watching, but trying to watch some classics.
And by the way, quite a few people have been asking about which films have inspired you the most, not just recently, but are there particular touchstones? You mentioned Breathless earlier, but I'm guessing that there are quite a few others.
Yeah, I should make a list, because I kind of draw a blank when you love movies and there's so many that inspire you. But off the top of my head, yeah, Breathless made a big impression on me. And I think, I feel like movies that I saw when I was a teenager and a young adult, like, stay with me. One of my favorite movies is Gilda, like seeing Rita Hayworth as Gilda, and
Gilda was on TV today on TCM.
No way.
I could not resist. My husband was watching as I walk in, and Mark says, it's Gilda. So I watched for about 10 minutes, and I was just so taken with it. I hadn't seen it in many years.
I haven't seen it in years, but I remember the introduction of that character, and I was thinking about it lately because I was thinking about introducing a character, and the introduction of Gilda is so great. So I think, I haven't seen it in years, and it's probably politically incorrect now, but it's her entrance is great. And I love that character, and it's glamorous. And I saw it as a kid, and I was like, that's what a woman is. But I think just for introducing a character, and I remember like seeing Lolita as a young person, Kubrick, obviously, and the editing really struck me in that, because there's an amazing scene where they're at the drive-in movie theater, and Humbert looks at Lolita, and then it cuts to a monster on the screen, and it just says so much about what images you put together, and what it says about the character, tells the story. So that I love for that. I love all that jazz. I feel like, okay, Sarah and I always talk about all that jazz, because there's a kind of the repetitiveness of his life with the classical music and him getting up, and it's showtime. And we've done it a few times in our work together. We've done that. We're like, oh, we'll do all that jazz montage to show kind of the monotony and rhythm. So I love all that jazz, and I'm just trying to think. I'm just really all off the top of my head of movies I love. I was thinking I want to watch In the Mood for Love again, because I haven't seen that in a while. And
actually, In the Mood for, when Lost in Translation came out, I remember that there was a review by Elvis Mitchell. I think it was in the New York Times, and he mentioned that it sort of connects the dots between the three great films about yearning. And if I'm remembering correctly, he said it was David Lean's Great Expectations, Richard Linklater's Before Sunrise, and Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love.
Oh, wow.
So you've mentioned the In the Mood for Love, but are the other two in any sense touchstones?
It's funny because Brief Encounter, isn't that David Lean? Brief Encounter was a big inspiration for Lost in Translation. When I saw that was kind of the starting point. I haven't watched that in a long time, but that's a great film, of course. So that was definitely an inspiration for that, and about that, that yearning and kind of unfulfilled romance. And In the Mood for Love, it's such a beautiful film. I wanted to revisit that. I was looking at a scene recently with Philippe Lassorde, when we were looking at we had so many scenes in restaurants, and kind of how to cover them, and his work is so beautiful in that. so yes, that's a favorite film that I want to revisit. And I was curious to see, I wanted to watch Raise the Red Lantern because I remember I loved that film and I haven't seen it since it came out. But
That
the power dynamics.
There was an early question from someone about color, the color palette of your films, and Jean Guillemot and my goodness, Raise the Red Lantern is one of the most beautiful manipulations of the color spectrum imaginable, but it also reminds me of what I thought was actually a direct homage in The Virgin Suicides to Lolita, because the character of Lux, played by Kirsten Dunst, I mean, we see her with her red popsicle.
Yeah, it's very Lolita.
It's totally out of, it's Sue Lyon in Lolita. Yeah. You kind of tip your hand to us there. Marcus Wolf was asking about whether form follows function or form is function. What's your process and your thoughts about this hierarchy? In other words, form and content for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I try to just be intuitive and just what I'm drawn to and what I want to see and what I feel like, and then it kind of takes its shape from there. So the form is definitely all related to the themes and the content of the story, and yeah, so I'm starting with a mood and then a story that I want to tell, and then finding the way through the look and the feeling to express that. But I really think it's just, you're just trying to convey a mood or a feeling that you leave the audience with, and to try to be poetic, I guess, when you can be.
Okay. A few people have asked about your father, and my favorite question of those is, what's the best piece of advice that Francis Ford Coppola ever gave to Sofia Coppola, professionally speaking?
I think, I was lucky to have such a great teacher, and it's funny, he gave me a book as a teenager. It was the Encyclopedia of Poetics, and he always talked about film as being poetry. So I think going into it thinking that has definitely, been a big influence on me, and, but he always said that the most important part is the writing and the acting. So he always stressed that. So that's something that I've always wanted to focus on. And he always told me to be clear on what your theme is, that if you can kind of say it in a word, then every decision you make is based on that. And then it's easy, when they ask you which shirt you want or which color or anything, it's always connected to the theme of the story. So that's been really helpful advice.
Sergio Delgado's asking whether you think it's important to go to a film school to start directing. Does the name of a university open opportunities in a very competitive industry? And I know that a lot of the people on this chat happen to be in film school, most of them at Columbia, but probably some not or not yet in film school. So if you could address that.
Yeah, I think the more education you can get, the better. And I would always encourage, if that's available to you, because you never know what great teacher is going to open you up to some film. And I think, especially at film school, being together with other film students and making things together, and everyone getting to do the different departments and find, to try out different aspects of it. I think mostly just being in that community. And I remember when I was in my 20s and kind of trying to find my way, an older friend who was a filmmaker told me, just spend the next 10 years finding your team, like finding your people and your crew. And I really took that to heart, and I really worked with different people and started to find my team. And now that's such a huge part of how I work, and probably all filmmakers is your collaborators, but having a core team of people that you're on the same page and understand what you're trying to do and there to support you is such a huge help, and it's such a big part of it for me. Oh, and I want to say, I think my friend Raynor Judd is here, so I want to say hi to her and say how important it is to have friends that, other artistic friends that really get what you're trying to do and cheer you on. That's such an important thing. So to find your people that you connect to and that are gonna cheer you on and get what you're trying to do.
Somebody actually asked whether you personally hire the crew. In other words, is that, are there producers who do that for you, or do you meet individually with everyone that you're going to be collaborating with?
I pick the key, all the key department heads, and then the producer that I work with helps me get the rest of the team. So it kind of depends on the role, but I meet the still photographer and the script supervisor and kind of a lot of the key elements, but then like your cinematographer will pick his, grip and electric team, and, each department head, then they pick their team. And then, so you just pick your head people and then they pick their team.
Got it.
And we had interns from the 92nd Street Y Young Producers Program, which is really nice.
Well, we are, thrilled because this is your second within 1.5 years relationship to the Y. You invited young people from CALL, well, actually I wrote down the exact, what it stands for, the Center for Arts Education and Leadership Program. Some visited your set while you were filming on the rocks. Some went to the edit process to observe how the editing takes place. That was so wonderful for the teenagers in New York who benefited from connection to you. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad. I'm so glad it's such a great program, and it was really, they were great to meet, and yeah, I'm glad to support that program.
Yay.
The film business is such a closed world that anything professionals can do to invite people from outside the world, I think, is so important.
Agreed. Robert Jones is asking a question related to a previous one as well. With the industry incorporating episodic storytelling in a big way via so many streaming outlets, do you see yourself moving into that realm? And another earlier question was about Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, whether those are in fact becoming for you an equally important next venue.
I think they're fun to watch, and I think it's interesting now that you can, when you do a movie, it has to be 90 minutes at least, and now I feel like what I appreciate about streaming is that you can have an idea that is shorter or longer, or you can do something in 3 parts, and so I think in that way, I think it's interesting that and because they're so open to, trying different things. So I think in that way it's exciting, but at the same point, I don't really see it as, it's not so much cinema to me. It's a different thing. And I think, but I think it's interesting. There's a lot of different things happening in it, and it's fun to watch.
Right. Somebody, actually 2 people, I believe, have asked about Harris Savides. He was your cinematographer early on. We're sorry that he's no longer with us. Could you talk a little about the impact that he had on you and finding a new way to see coverage?
Oh yeah, I love Harris Savides, and of course he was a great artist and an important person, and everyone who met him loved him. He was so sweet and helped me so much. And when I was working, I met him right after Marie Antoinette. I'd taken a break, and we did a commercial together, and we were just talking about kind of philosophy and approach to filmmaking, and he was so pure in what he loved about it, and he really inspired me to want to make film again, because after Marie Antoinette was kind of burnt, it was such a big project. And so we talked about somewhere as just being an experiment in how simply and minimally you could tell a story, and that was sort of the fun experiment of it. And he was just such an artist, and I learned a lot. And he always said, keep it simple. That's his motto. So I always think of him and keep it simple. Like, you don't need to do too much. And yeah, and he introduced me to Philippe Lassorde, who I now work with. But yeah, I learned a lot from him. He was a great artist.
Great. Marinthia Gutierrez is asking a question similar to a few others. How do you like to run your set, and how do you make yourself and others around you comfortable?
Oh, I mean, I'm very comfortable on set because I grew up on sets, especially. So I feel very at home on set. And I think hopefully that if I'm comfortable, that makes other people feel comfortable. I see it sort of like as having a party, and you just try to make everyone feel included and make a nice atmosphere. And Harris and I would always play music on set. And so I think to make it as inviting, and especially you're asking the actors to be vulnerable, so you want to make it as comfortable as you can so that they can feel open to revealing themselves, and just to have a relaxed and respectful, place where people want to do their best work. I think it's fun to be on set. There's an energy to it. So as long as everybody feels, that they're safe and comfortable.
In fact, Amy Monahan wrote, a friend who worked on Beguiled, Michael Martin, said that if he could just work with you the rest of his career, that'd be great because your set was so amazing as a work environment.
That's so nice. That's so nice to hear. You know, that's so nice to hear. I hear that often, and I'm so proud of that. But I haven't been on that many other people's sets. So I know that there's sometimes like there's ADs that yell and it gets stressful. So I definitely have a policy of no yellers, and to try to keep a nice atmosphere. And there's no reason we can't all be civil and nice and enjoy it this time, because it takes so much a big part of your life that you want to have a nice experience.
Yeah,
better work comes out of that.
Sofia Arriaga asked a few questions. I think one of the most interesting perhaps for film students here is, what was the biggest mistake that you had to learn from?
Oh, that's such a good question. Oh, that's such a good question. Biggest mistake. I don't know. I think I have to think on that. I have to think on that.
Yeah, I think we all have a slightly better tendency to remember the good stuff that we always want to keep foregrounded. And a mistake is not necessarily something that we keep in our immediate horizon.
Yeah, I know we learn from our mistakes. I have to say, like, one thing I learned is from photography is if there's something you want to change, you have to change it, because if you leave it, just some little thing about, like, you don't like her hair where it is, then in the edit you're going to be like, oh, I should have changed it. So it's not a mistake, but I did learn from probably the few times that I didn't speak up that how important that is to get it exactly how you want.
Okay. Lee is asking, what do you hope that people will take away from your work? I know that's a little bit general, so I'm not sure if you want to answer it in terms of a specific film or two, or is there an overriding sense of that?
I think, the purpose for me is just to connect with people. So if people connect to it, I think that's why you make work, is to connect with other humans. And so if anybody gets anything from it and has some experience or emotion or connection, I think that's what, you hope to connect with other people, even if it's just a few people. I think that's what I hope.
And I have a question myself that I think one or two people did ask as well. I mean, you were, if I want to make sure I have the year right. Yes, it was in 2004 that you became the first American woman ever nominated for the Best Director Oscar, after Jane Campion and Lena Wertmuller. Do you think that the situation for female directors has improved in terms of getting films made and making them the way you want?
It seems like it, since I started, that there's a lot more openness to stories about female characters, where when I was starting out, I remember hearing a lot of times, oh, well, boys will go to movies. Girls will go to movies with boy characters, but boys won't go to stories with girl characters. And so there wasn't a lot of value on that. And of course, we've seen in in more recent times that there's been stories driven by female characters that have been big successes, but that was a big block before. So I'm happy for that. And you still when I have meetings with executives, there's still some companies where it's just a room of men, and then you're trying to explain a story that to maybe, whereas, or it's more something that a woman would relate to. So, but I do think it has changed a lot, and I'm always happy when there's more and more different voices.
Okay. There was a question from Haya BG. Where are you in relation to the camera on set? And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, that's another thing I learned from my dad, who said, always sit right next to the camera, always be with the camera. And I love being with the DP. And so I'm right by the camera with the DP, and then the script supervisor is with me. And I hope that that's something that, like, I love working, Ava Cabrera, who I worked with on the last film and a few films, comes from working on film. And it's a really different tradition than I think people that are learning digitally. It's different. And I hope that students learn about what the kind of classics of script supervision, what they do, because I find it so important and helpful. I know for the editor, it's so such a great tool to have all their notes. But so I'm always talking to them after each take, and I'm always next to the DP.
Good. I realize that we're actually coming towards the end of our hour, but I have so many more questions that if it's okay with you, Sophia, I'm just going to ask a few more because they've been coming in fast and furious, and I'm sort of desperately trying to keep one eye on the chat and one eye on you. Laura was asking, how do you see social distancing changing the future of filmmaking?
Oh, I don't know. I was wondering if there's gonna be a lot more animation now because we can't film. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, yeah, how this shapes things. And I don't know, just watching SNL doing it on Zoom, like maybe there'll be some Zoom series or something creative will come out of this time.
I hope. And Soren Nielsen's asking, as we work towards making our first features where it feels like all we do is compromise to get it made, what is something we should never compromise on?
I think you have to get it the way that you want it and the way you like it. And I would say, do it for as little budget as you can, as low budget as you can, so you have creative freedom. That's always been my approach. I always try to keep the budget as low as possible so I can have the most creative freedom. And I feel like make it on your own at home with your phone before having to compromise to get more money or something. I think it's so, gratifying to make what you really had in your mind and what you really care about. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, that makes sense. And by the way, is it an amusing response from Brian Balderas about social distancing, changing things for the future? Maybe more shots through windows. And Ian Scott Todd is asking a quick question. Any plans to release more of your films in the Criterion collection? I'd love their edition of Virgin Suicide. Because by the way, I'm doing a series right now of film history for the Y, and all of our films are Criterion channel because they provided free streaming. So unfortunately, it turned out that we could not include your later films. Those are not available. I did see Lick the Star. Your first film, your short, is part of the Criterion channel, but not the later films. So this is more of a distribution question. Do you have any control over that?
Yeah, I mean, I was so happy when they wanted to do Virgin Suicides. I talked to them about it, and I was so happy to have that. But yeah, no, I don't have any other plans. But I was very proud to have my first Criterion, and hopefully I'll have another. And I feel like we're so lucky to have the Criterion channel right now. I think that's such a great thing for us to have during this time at home.
Yes. Melissa is asking, what are some programs or initiatives in the industry that you would recommend for female directors?
Oh, I don't know enough about what is available. I just I thought the Young Producers program at the 92nd Street Y was a great way to learn about film. But I don't know enough about where to look for what are the best programs for young women.
Okay. And Ian Wold is asking, what is your favorite movie of all the ones you've directed?
Oh, that's funny. It's like, which kid you like the most. Yeah, they're just like different moments of my life. So it's hard to pick. I feel like we were thinking about Virgin Suicides when I was talking to Kirsten. It's like my first film, so I have an attachment, but Lost in Translation is probably the most personal to me. And but I can't, I don't know. It's hard to pick.
Okay. I realize that we are at the end of time. I'm just going to ask perhaps there are so many good questions, but any final advice to young writer directors?
Oh, my friend Anna Sweet got an award the other day, and she said, "Live your dream." And it's just the best thing to say, but to try to, make what you want to see and what you feel like is not available, that you're not seeing. I think that's what drove me to want to make things, is I didn't feel like what I wanted to see was there and that point of view. And so I think just making what you believe in and you want to put out into the world. I hope that's not too vague, but.
No, it's good. And actually somebody just wrote, Sophia, you are a badass, never stop. What else can I say that could top that? I mean, basically, I have the distinct feeling that we could easily have one more hour with you, because you're not only a wonderful filmmaker, you're a very thoughtful and generous human being. And I know that I speak for the hundreds and hundreds of people, some of whom have had a chance to voice things and some of whom have not. But we really, really appreciate your taking the time to answer our questions, to be a shining example of creativity and endurance. And we all look forward to On the Rocks, among other films. I'm hoping that we have another opportunity, maybe live, maybe in person on stage, as opposed to all in our little boxes, to continue what I think is a really important and nourishing conversation. So
I enjoyed talking to you. Thanks, Annette. Thanks. I enjoyed talking to you, and I hope everyone is safe and watching good movies at home. And it was fun to talk to you anytime.
Thank you very much. And thank you, all of you, for being with us. Thank you, Sarah Flack. And we hope to see you again. Just stay healthy. Good night.
You.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.